Welcome to War Stories, a series of videos exploring the iconic battles and conflicts that shaped medieval Europe. So now let's talk about the 100 Years' War, which was fought from 1337 to 1453 AD. That's 116 years. Who's counting? It was, so look at, you can see some images here. I want you to take a look at before I move the slide. There's lots of cool pictures there. You can see in the lower right hand, you can see the image of the royal house of Valois, the French flag, the fleur-de-lis on background of royal blue. We're going to do some highlights. I can't do the whole conflict. So first of all, what was it? It was a series of conflicts between the English house of Plantagenet and the French house of Valois over the throne of France. 5 generations of kings fought for the throne of the dominant kingdom of Western Europe, making it the most stubborn battle of mine in human history. The first phase of the war, which I will call England on the Move, began with the Battle of Sluys on June 22nd, 1340. 120 to 150 English ships feinted against a superior defensive force of 230 French ships. Right? So almost twice as many French ships. The English, they feinted, they attacked, and then they pretended to withdraw until the wind changed in the afternoon, which they knew was going to happen. And then they attacked with both the wind and the sun behind their backs. The English won a resounding victory, capturing 166 French ships and sinking 24 others. Guys, that's 200. The French had 230 ships. All but 30 of them were captured or sank, and most of them were captured. They killed between 16,000 and 20,000 men. The English only lost about 500 men. It was a great start for the British. Then the Battle of Crécy on August 26, 1346, where the English landed a major invasion force using in part those captured French ships, right? So that was the reason they were so focused on capturing the French ships. The point of the Battle of Sluys was to gain enough ships to allow them to move an enormous army across the channel. The French were surprised. The English longbowmen diced the French up good. Some historians estimate that about 500,000 arrows were shot during the battle. You guys, 500,000 arrows. That's so many arrows. Thousands of French died to only a few dozen or 100 English. Edward, the Black Prince of Wales, went on to take Calais in 1347. He's called the Black Prince of Wales because that's what the French started calling him, because he was such a horrible, he was so good at killing them that he was like a plague running through their lands. And the English found out the French were calling him the Black Prince, and they were like, nice, we like it, that's our dude. But then the plague happened. The Black Death, which was a pandemic, this time not Prince Edward, who was the earlier Black Death, struck Paris in 1348, essentially ending the war until 1355. And then there was kind of a blitzkrieg. The English invented it before the Germans. Actually, technically, they didn't invent it. Charlemagne invented it. He'd done it before. It's called a chevauchée, where you ride your horseback really fast across the country and just like kind of blitz through and take a bunch of territory. In 1355, Edward did one of these. He rode through France on a mounted raid, pillaging Avignonet, Castelnaudary, Carcassonne, and Narbonne. The next year, he added Auvergne, Limousin, and Berry to the list. That's like major French cities. All this led to the Battle of Poitiers on September 19, 1356, where Edward routed the French. I mean, this war could not be going better. France is doomed. But then on Black Monday, Easter Day of 1360, God answered the French prayers for deliverance with a freak hailstorm that struck the English encampment, killing over 1,000 men. This forced Edward to negotiate peace, which was concluded on May 8th, 1360. That peace lasted until 1369. So we get a nice little 9-year reprieve. You know, I've never thought about it. I wonder if you add up all the time that the war was off to plague and armistices, if that would bring it back down to like exactly 100 years. Somebody should do the math on that. Anyway, that brings us to the second phase, which I will call France Strikes Back. In 1373, John of Gaunt, who you may know from Shakespeare plays, attempted to imitate the Black Prince's rampages through France, leading a force of 9,000 men and 30,000 horses across France. Now, the point of having more horses than men is that way you can change horses and keep the men on fresh horses and you can move faster. They were harassed by the French army, but the French refused to join pitched battle with them. So essentially the French employed like guerrilla tactics to kind of, nip at their heels and chip away at their strength. Weather and superior French maneuvers eventually forced their retreat, having lost more than half of their horses. That's the real tragedy of the thing, 15,000 dead horses. Throughout this time, the French drove the English back from their continental holdings without bringing them to pitched battle, right? All of that stuff that Edward had conquered, that's all England now. England has got a massive territory on the continent. And now in this time, the French keep pushing them back, and they managed to do it with these guerrilla tactics, not ever doing a straight stand-up battle. Things were going very well for the French, but a new round of plague and peasant revolts at the taxes required to support all this war broke the back of the French efforts. Similar unrest was happening in England in response to the war taxes. During this time, Henry Bolingbroke deposed Richard II and became Henry IV, and Owen Glendower's rebellion in 1400 caused further problems. The French allied with the Welsh and advanced as far as Worcester, while the Spanish raided the coast. Okay, so now you've got French armies in England, and they advance all the way to Worcester together with the Welsh, led by Owen Glendower, and the Spanish are raiding the coast with their navy. Glendower was not put down until 1415, so that was a rough stretch for the British. But then we get to the third phase, which I would call the return of England. I could have called it the return of the king as well. Henry V in Agincourt, late 1415. I could also have called it the return of the king, because Henry V took Harfleur in August of 1415, then marched towards Calais, which was still in English hands. He was outmaneuvered and trapped at the field of Agincourt, which looked to be a decisive victory. Instead, his forces inflicted a devastating victory on the French, killing about 40% of the French nobility. There were more French prisoners than the entire English army, and so Henry could not safely keep them, and he ordered their deaths. This is all depicted wonderfully in Shakespeare's play, Henry V. He then retook Caen in 1417 and Rouen in 1419, subduing all of Normandy and most of the cities in France, ending in Rouen. Charles VI signed the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, giving Henry his daughter Catherine of Valois in marriage, and naming their children the heirs to the throne of France. The Dauphin, which is the French word for the prince, the dolphin, because the Valois had dolphins as one of their emblems in their heraldry, the Dauphin, Charles VII, was declared illegitimate by that treaty in order to make space for declaring the future children of Henry V and Catherine of Valois the legitimate heirs to the throne. The Dauphin was not illegitimate, and he did not take it well that his father declared him illegitimate legally and took his kingdom from him. This ought to have ended the wars and united the two countries forever, but it didn't. The Dauphin still held land and an army, and he refused to accept the treaty, which had been ratified by the French Parliament. Now, I can understand why he's refusing to accept the treaty, because it's calling him a bastard. Also, he wants to be king. Henry returned to England, leaving his heir Thomas in command. Thomas made a right mess of things and got himself killed and his army defeated at the Battle of Beaujeu. Henry came back and attacked one of the Dauphin's towns called Mayo. The town held out for longer than he thought, taking 7 months to conquer. Henry contracted something, maybe dysentery, and died on August 31st of 1422. He and Catherine had one child, Henry VI, the only hope of peace. By the earlier heir of Henry V, I think he was an heir by an earlier marriage. But Henry and Catherine only had the one child, Henry VI, who now is the son of the legitimate rulers of France and England, the son of the House of Plantagenet and the House of Valois. He is the only hope of peace. To quote the scriptures, peace? Peace? There is no peace. This section I call England's last gasp. Henry VI was 9 months old when his father died, and he became the king of England and France. The English continued the war, fighting well and devastating the Dauphin's army in 1424. Then, the English besieged Orléans, leaving the Dauphins back against the wall. In 1429, a peasant girl called Joan d'Arc, or in English, Joan of Arc, came to the Dauphin and said that God had shown her in a vision that she would drive out the English. The Dauphin sent her, then 17, with an army to relieve the city. I mean, can you imagine how desperate the Dauphin is? He's like, a 17-year-old girl comes and she says, God has told me that I will deliver the city. And he's like, cool, take an army. I tried everything else. Why not? Let's try little girls. Maybe that'll work. It did. She broke the siege in 9 days and pursued the English aggressively, defeating them at Patay, taking Rheims unopposed, and then Joan of Arc crowned the Dauphin King Charles VII. She suffered major failures against the English at Paris, and La Charité, and she was eventually captured by Burgundians who were allied with the English, who then handed her over to the English. The English put her on trial for heresy and blasphemy. The nature of her heresy and blasphemy was that she wore pants. And so since she was cross-dressing, they convicted her of heresy and blasphemy and burned her at the stake. In 1456, a ecclesiastical inquisitorial court overturned this ruling as utter nonsense. And she was actually canonized in France, and now she's Saint Joan of Arc in France. The English nearly turned the tide in 1450 at Caen, but support arrived just in time to defeat them. Charles VII had locked up Normandy, leaving the English only Gascony. He laid siege to the capital of Gascony, which is Bordeaux, in 1451. It surrendered to him, and then was retaken by the English on October 23rd, 1452, but then the English were beaten again at the Battle of Castillon on July 17, 1453, and that finished them. Though England and France were formally at war for 20 more years, the English simply couldn't field continental armies anymore. The War of the Roses between the English houses of Lancaster and York started in 1455, and that took up all of their time for the next 32 years. And so the 100 Years' War came to an end after 116 years.